I think that mental health is by far the most important thing to keep an eye on, because it's very hard to diagnose. Now with affective computing and facial algorithms, we are starting to get an understanding of what emotions go through an individual, and we can start plot out basically to track and follow individuals if they are going to become emotional troubled. So my take on this is to focus a bit more on what technology can actually help them, wearable technology, facial recognition, and so on and so forth while on the ship, and then prevent it early instead of, well, helping them once damage has happened.
When it comes to the wellness and the well-being of seafarers, I mean, let's be clear, there are some fantastic ship operators, ship managers out there who train their crews well and look after them well. But equally, there are some rotten apples in the barrel. And I think as we move into this new era of really radical transparency that is going to come to every industry and will come to shipping, it's actually going to be increasingly easy to identify and to call out those people who don't treat their crews properly. And equally, don't look after cargoes, don't treat their counterparties, etc., etc. Generally speaking, ship operators who don't treat their crews well are probably just not very good ship operators. And it may be that the barriers to entry in the shipping industry are going to rise as we go forward. But that radical transparency is going to make these abuses far more obvious. And if as an industry we can come together with other stakeholders like cargo owners and regulators and actually find a new paradigm where we can identify these people and stop them trading, then I think that would be a benefit across the board.
I think we continue to battle with some of the key messages about safety for seafarers, sometimes either because of the urgency of a situation or sometimes because of complacency, we don't take sufficient care. And when we look at accidents with slips, trips and falls, they continue to occur. But more importantly, when we're going into things like enclosed spaces, it's very important that we follow proper procedures, prepare the seafarers for their entry into those spaces and make sure that they're taking all the proper precautions and that we're not taking shortcuts. We all have a responsibility in that regard.
I think they need to do a lot of things differently. Some of them are about going back to the past in a way and picking up on some things they used to do rather well, but they seem to have got neglected lately. So, for example, encouraging more communal activity on board in a positive way, not by reducing access to internet, which is what some companies like to talk about, but actually by increasing the spaces that are available for seafarers to mix. Perhaps returning to allowing seafarers to have barbecues on board ships, thinking carefully about implementing dry ship, no alcohol policies, which have social consequences as well as other more obvious safety benefits. So it's about thinking about, what is the balance that you want to strike there. And I think providing more recreational facilities on board. So when I very first went on ships doing research, we used to see basketball, squash courts sometimes, swimming pools. All these things have gone and haven't been replaced. And shipping companies are aware that the social life on board is diminished, but they seem to be attributing that to internet access, but that's not actually the case. If you took the internet away and where there isn't internet, the social life on board has died, because actually the spaces and the things for people to do are not there. So really the only kinds of options for people are to sit in quite small crew messes together, which is not so comfortable to all be on top of each other. The seating is not always very good, and it's to watch DVDs, which isn't really a social activity really. So I think looking at ways of actually bringing back some of that social life on board is really, really positive. I also think that in relation to health, that and thinking about food is really important. Most companies have seen a reduction in the galley staff by half. So you used to regularly have a chief cook and a second cook and 2 messmen, and now you have a cook and a messman, and that's really impacted on the food on board, so that the cook actually has to produce rather more limited food. They take shortcuts more often, like deep frying everything before it gets either cooked in the oven or served. So I think there are many positive things that could be done to really improve seafarer welfare. I think it's an absolute must that seafarers should have access to the internet on board, and not just email, but actually the internet. Sometimes companies worry that seafarers will be anxious by news from home, but in actual fact, seafarers will always get in contact with home, sometimes maybe in port, and it's much more beneficial to their mental health and well-being to be able to be in contact with home when there are problems, so they know that the problem is actually maybe resolved, than it is to stay on a voyage for 2 weeks having no idea what's going on home. I mean, they're just like you and me, so it's the same for you and me. You get on an aeroplane, have a long flight, if there's something gone wrong just before you left, you can't wait to find out that it's resolved, or at least to help give advice to resolve it, or to see for yourself how bad it is. So when seafarers have problems at home, like a sick kid or something like that, actually being involved in advising their partner and maybe seeing the child for themselves and talking to them and so on, this is really beneficial for them. So I think whatever very minor negatives there might be to do with internet access, they're way, way, way outweighed by the positives, just as they are, I think, for most of us.
I think there's many things, but for us in K-Line, we are focusing a lot around the safety culture and the maturity of the safety culture of the organization. And what I mean is that where people can feel safe and vulnerable and being able to admit mistakes and failures, they can embrace, where a culture where people can embrace failure, admit mistakes. I think that's really an important part that the industry should try.
To improve on safety, I believe that the industry should focus less on the procedural side of the safety equation. The onboard environment is very dynamic. The procedures we have in our safety management system is very static. We cannot describe all unforeseen circumstances, situations that we have on board a ship. So instead of considering the procedures as a tool, we should consider it as a guideline. It can set out authorities and responsibilities. We should merely focus on the behaviors, the leadership. I mean, how do we ensure that our team leaders can encourage our crew to take active part in, for instance, the toolbox talk or the risk assessment process? How can the team leader on board the ship encourage an environment where intervention and stop work authority is expected and respected? Now, this will be a change. So behavioral-based safety and safety leadership, that will be the way forward.